Good afternoon, and welcome to this closing session of what has been an unusual, but I think remarkable 24th Global Conference.
We have I'm Jerry Baker, I should say, by the way, editor-at-large of the Wall Street Journal. We have a really good panel to talk about. The topic is the future of political parties. I have a feeling that the topic will range quite broadly within that, but we're going to try and talk, initially at least, about what political parties, and we have a great panel and a very experienced and very appropriate panel to discuss about it. On my far left, of course, you all know Andrew Yang, highly successful entrepreneur and businessman, of course, turned political candidate, ran not once but twice in the last couple of years for the Democratic nomination for president, of course, in 2020, and then earlier this year for the Democratic nomination for mayor of New York. And of course, most recently, he has no longer subscribes to the Democratic Party. He recently became an independent, so he'll have some particularly insightful observations, I think, to make the state of democracy. On my immediate left is Amy Walter, very familiar to all of you, editor-in-chief, publisher of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter. Amy won't mind me saying, I hope.
Thank you.
That she is.
Thank you.
Please, yes, go ahead. She is the doyenne of political analysts. I seriously don't think there's anybody who competes with her for the depth and range of knowledge, expertise that she brings to the understanding of political trends in the country at the moment. And I will say this also, that in an age, and we'll talk a lot about this obviously, of excessive hype of partisanship in this country, Amy is one of those very, very rare figures who commands tremendous respect across the political spectrum. And that alone is something that we should all celebrate. So it's a great pleasure to have Amy here. On my immediate right, Matt Whitaker served as acting U.S. Attorney General. Served as acting U.S. Attorney General in the Trump administration. Before that, he'd been Chief of Staff to Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. And before that, he'd been U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa. He is a prominent conservative Republican commentator and writer, and I'm sure he will have some very trenchant observations about the state of not only parties in general, but perhaps his own party too. And on my far right, Adrian Elrod, who is a very seasoned political strategist. Can't quite believe it, but it says apparently she has 20 years of political experience mostly in Democratic politics. She's the president of Elrod Strategies, served as director of strategic communications in Hillary Clinton's campaign, and she, again, has some deep expertise, knowledge, and I'm sure some interesting observations about her party and indeed the state of politics in general. So, ladies and gentlemen, please, once again, do welcome our panel. So we may not agree on much in this country, or maybe not even on this panel, but I think we can probably all agree that the political institutions of this country are under stress in a way that perhaps haven't been seen in my lifetime, despite my accent. I have lived in this country for a quarter of a century, and I've followed politics closely. I don't think we've seen the level of stress and turbulence that the political institutions are under. Obviously, earlier this year, we had the events of January the 6th, perhaps the most visible demonstration of the division and the stress in the country that this country's seen in many, many years. We now have a former president who, for the first time ever, refuses to accept the result of the election and challenges the legitimacy of the current, in fact, challenges the validity of the election and the legitimacy of the current election. But I should say, in fairness, we also have had a turbulent presidency, which was marked in many respects by continuous attempts to challenge the legitimacy of Donald Trump by Democrats and by many people outside too. So we have this very, very bipartisan challenge to the legitimacy of our political institutions. We have very, very limited trust. Polling taken all the time shows how little trust voters have in the other political party, in many of the political institutions that we've been so used to having. And again, as I say, we have an age of mutual hostility, it seems, which challenges us. At the same time, of course, we have growing interest in the idea of a third party and independence, and I'm sure we're going to hear from Andrew about this, with the dissatisfaction that there is among a lot of voters with the partisan nature of the political process. We've seen an interest in the growth, the opportunity that might be presented in a third party. Just before I go to questions, let me just give you one illustration I think, of how serious the situation is today. There was a poll, actually, I just saw this morning, I happened to see it, a poll taken by the Seltzer Corporation for Grinnell College, and it asked, among other things, Americans whether they think American democracy is under threat. And the result was 52% of the respondents said American democracy was under major threat. 29% thought, 29% said it was under minor threat, and only 14%, 1 in 7 people, thought that American democracy was not under any kind of a threat. So I think that probably does show the scale of the challenge. I should quickly say, of course, you know by now, but just to remind you, please, we will have time for questions for the audience. Very much welcome questions from the audience. Please point your phone at the QR code, which will crop up from time to time. In fact, it's there already behind us now, and I'll try to take as many of your questions as possible. But let's get started. I want to start with you, Andrew. I think when you ran for president, you got a lot of people were attracted to you, I think it's fair to say, across the political spectrum, because you seem to offer a technocratic approach. You seem to you hadn't been seen as a kind of long-standing kind of partisan political figure in the way that maybe many of the other candidates had been. In the end, you weren't successful, but you gained a tremendous amount of attention, and same again when you ran for mayor of New York. But now you've left the Democratic Party, now you're an independent. My question to you has to be, especially in this age of partisan politics, why do you think you'll be more successful as an independent than you were as a Democrat?
I want the people here to reflect on the industries you work in, how much has changed over the last number of years, and then you have our politics, which are stuck in time. Right now, 62% of Americans want there to be some alternative to the two major parties, the highest level it's been recorded in years, but our system's not able to evolve or adapt or integrate new points of view and perspectives. It's one reason why so many Americans feel so frustrated and angry, and it's also a reason why our polarization is at literally civil war levels right now. 42% of Democrats and Republicans view the other side as evil or their mortal enemies. We're seeing political violence manifest more and more. And if you think about the future of America, are you optimistic or pessimistic given that our system's unable to reform itself? I became an independent because I see that our structures are setting us up to fail, to turn on each other, to disintegrate into some version of Civil War 2.0. And I left the Democratic Party to advance structural reforms that would actually enable us to reward those political figures that decide to come together, to be reasonable, to compromise, because right now, all of the incentives are punitive around people that decide to try and work across the aisle. And I was with a Republican senator just the other day, and she said to me, we get rewarded more for keeping an issue around than for resolving it. That is why we are stuck. In your industries, you would never accept this level of performance. We should not be accepting it in our politics as well. The Forward Party is going to be a popular movement of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans alike around the structural reforms that will actually align our representatives' interests with ours. This is our only chance. If we do not take this chance, fast forward, things are going to get worse, not better, because all of the incentives are towards our polarization, from the political incentives to our media organizations that separate us into ideological camps to social media that just pours gasoline on the whole thing. We have to come back from the brink. It's not going to happen if people like us who see these problems don't actually get serious about solving them.
Thanks, Andrew. But Andrew, and again, I think it is important to say that Democrats spent a lot of time when Donald Trump was president denying his legitimacy. They, as it turned, they promoted. We're learning more and more, and we'll probably learn more when John Durham comes up finally with whatever he comes up with. That this idea that Russia that he colluded with Russia to get elected in that 2016 election. That looks increasingly like something that was, at minimum, distributed by, promoted by Democrats, and used by Democrats, to continually undermine President Trump in the first 2 years. So you can't really be surprised, can you, when Republicans, complain about that, and then when Republicans say, hey, maybe, we don't think the 2020 election was fair either.
I think we should all be deeply concerned by the fact that the legitimacy of the presidency has been questioned to a higher degree with each successive cycle. And Donald Trump has clearly taken it to the next level, saying, look, these election returns are bogus, the election was stolen, you shouldn't believe it. If you look at the relationship with the news media, it may be the defining element of the parties at this point. 69% of Democrats have a high trust in the media. You look at Republicans, that number plummets to 15%. So if you have a leader who says, hey, election was stolen, a lot of people will be like, yes, he's right, the news media is lying to me, because that's where a lot of them are. If you're interested, independents lie between those two extremes at 36%. But the trust in media has been declining and collapsing over this last number of years, and we can see all very clearly that we're heading towards potential political violence in 2024, because if Trump is the candidate, none of us can imagine him just saying, well, this time the vote count was accurate, I lost, let's all go home. There are two major possibilities. One, he wins fair and square, which is a very real possibility given the numbers that we're seeing. And you're all probably aware of this, but Joe right now is around 43%. Markets have a 72% chance of Republicans taking the House next November, which is going to really limit Democrats' ability to put any points on the board. So outcome number one is Trump wins legitimately, probably not the popular vote, but the electoral vote. Or two, he says he wins. And many of you have seen some of the discussion around this. If he says, look, we won, let's go and take it, he's going to have many, many people that are behind him and are willing to do that. We are in store for unthinkable scenes here in the United States of America in 3 short years. All of us can sense it. It's because of the collapse of institutional trust that has been building for years and years. Now, there's some asymmetry to the collapse of trust. It looks differently between Republicans and Democrats. At this point, Democrats have become the de facto party of the fading establishment. And then Republicans have been swept by this anti-institutionalist fervor. That is the argument we're having. It's an argument that all of us are going to lose. And we're going to lose in dramatic fashion. Let one lesson be that whatever unthinkable scenarios we can imagine for our country, they're now on the table. They're all very realistic. We've already seen dystopian scenes we would not have imagined in our country over this last number of months, and they're going to get worse, not better. So many of us feel this. And the question is, what are we going to do? I have a suggestion, which is that we should try to evolve and advance our system to become more multipolar as quickly as possible, because all politics is tribal. And the last thing you want is two tribes warring and clashing with no one being able to claim a lasting victory. That's a recipe for disaster. What we need to do is follow the model of other countries around the world. The UK has 5 parties, Germany has 7 parties, Sweden has 8 parties. And in that scenario, if one party succumbs to bad leadership, it's not an existential threat. It's not something that's going to rally tens of millions of people. It's a problem, but it's not the same level
of problem. But Andrew, as Amy says, you face tremendous institutional obstacles. The Electoral College, most obviously. I mean, we know famously. Ross Perot got 19% of the vote in 1992. Didn't get a single electoral vote. He came close in, I think, Maine, maybe in one state. He got over 30% of the vote in Maine, and he still didn't get an electoral vote in Maine. The system is built in, isn't it, to promote the two-party system. How do you overcome it?
If you look at the Constitution of the United States, there's not a single word about political parties. Washington was anti-partisan. John Adams said 2 great parties would be an evil for the country. That was in 1780. The parties were an invention decades later. We've been dealing with this creaking, nearly collapsing duopoly for 150 years. It's not working. And then this question comes up, it's like, okay, then how do you change it? Now, everyone thinks about the presidential, but the mechanics of all of this are at the state level. Because there's nothing in the Constitution about this, it's all run at the state level. And Alaska last year made a dramatic switch where they switched to open primaries and ranked choice voting. The major problem in this country is this. 83% of the districts are either very blue or very red. You have a 28% national approval rate for Congress and a re-election rate for individual members at 92%. Think about that mismatch. And the reason is that if you get through the primary, you win in 83% of the districts. So what are my incentives as a legislator? Placate and please the 10 to 20% most extreme voters in my district on one side or the other. That's why we are so stuck.
Right.
What Alaska did is Alaska changed it so that you had to appeal to 51% of the people in Alaska as opposed to the most extreme 10 to 20%, and you immediately saw a change in decision-making from Senator Lisa Murkowski and other people. We can unlock a critical mass of our senators and legislators at the state level without needing Congress, without needing the Electoral College. The fact that we're always pressed and obsessed about the presidential election is the mistake.
Right.
We can do this at the state level.
Andrew, you ran in, as I said earlier, you ran in two Democratic primaries, the presidential primary and then the New York City mayor's race. In both those primaries, interestingly, the candidate that won was the one who kind of like reached out more to the independent voters. Obviously Joe Biden in the presidential race, and Eric Adams was, outflanked heavily on the left by a couple of candidates in the New York City mayor's race, and he won. He came through, it was pretty close in the end, and you had all that stuff over ranked choice voting and the losing the votes and all that kind of stuff. But Adams, the guy who had reached out across the aisle, said he was going to be, especially on issues like police reform, was going to be more of a centrist. So the system kind of worked in a way, didn't it, to produce more of a consensus candidate rather than the extremist?
We see the results we see in large part because politics has become so tribal, and we're arguing in values, in symbols, in coded language. When Adrian talks about, hey, Democrats are for policies that would help a lot of folks in rural environments, that's not what's relevant. It turns out that people don't vote based on policy. If you looked at the correlation between someone's policy desires and their political self-identification, there's only a correlation of 0.25. It turns out voters aren't voting based on white papers. Voters are voting based on tribal appeals. When I ran for president, political consultants would just tell me how awful a politician I was. They were like, you don't sound emotional enough. You just sound like you're talking facts, figures, AI, automation, etc. You need to change it up. And it turns out that the way I talk was like a new political language. Who knew? And that political language activated a new group of people that were either apolitical or independent or didn't care about politics. And so this finding that all politics is now tribal, we're just arguing in values and symbols, to me is the answer. It's our way out. It's that if we run around and try and appeal to voters and say, hey, look, this would really help you, they don't care. Like, I've talked to thousands of voters of every background in Iowa, where I'm going next week, so maybe I'll see you there. And if you were to say to them, if you just present something in neutral language, all of a sudden they're much more open to it. If you say something that they've been coded to respond to negatively, they'll just dismiss it out of hand. So what we need is a new language, a new political language to change the dynamic. Because right now, we're seeing a war of symbols and values that no one's going to win. And both sides are going to think that they're in the right, even as it drags us all into the abyss.
Andrew, a question for you, which is, you ran as a Democrat twice. You've got this plan for a new party. The question is, aren't you just going to draw votes away from the Democratic candidate, just as, say, Jill Stein did in 2016, or other candidates like that have done?
I've been an independent for 2 weeks, and it's been a glorious 2 weeks, I have to say.
It's all downhill from here, I'm sorry.
Well, first, again, the action is local. It's in these 22 ballot initiatives where we need to unlock our legislators. Fast forwarding to the presidential, we're focused far too much on that. That said, the notion that a candidate is only going to draw from one party just isn't borne out in the numbers. It turns out that more Republicans and independents want a third-party option than Democrats. When I ran for president as a Democrat, 42% of my supporters said they weren't going to support the Democratic nominee. So empirically, it's anyone's guess whose party would be negatively impacted by a third-party entrant. It would depend upon a lot of variables. I will say, though, that the biggest change we can make is just a shift to ranked choice voting so that there's no more spoiler effect. The fact that we have the zero-sum game, it's like, oh, if you run, it's going to mess it up for my team or your team. Just make it so that people can express their true preferences. Take it from a guy who lost a ranked choice voting election. Ranked choice voting is the future. It is.
Well, so
it's much, much better.
Has there been, though, an independent candidate who's won a ranked choice vote?
I'm sorry?
Where is there a state where, again, a high-profile race where ranked choice voting did produce a candidate who wasn't a D or an R?
Well, the great thing about ranked choice voting is that even if it elects the same person, it's going to dramatically improve their incentives. Because again, instead of trying to please 10 to 20% on the extremes, you have to try and deliver results for 51%. And I will take that every day of the week. You know, I'm not doing what I'm doing because I really want a forward party member to necessarily be there in that seat. I just want the system to work. And the system right now is designed to fail us at a colossal level. We're living through the greatest design failure in the history of the world. And the fact that not enough people are willing to stand up and say, you know what, it's the system itself that needs to be modernized, threatens to destroy us. The people in this room, you know what I'm talking about. Again, you would never accept this in your firms, in your industry. You would make the change like that. But for whatever reason in our politics, we're being told, can't change, carved in a stone tablet. It's not even carved in a stone tablet. We have these debilitating bureaucracies that are just floundering in front of us. They're getting overrun by people within their party. They're being corrupted, and we're allowing it to happen. Let's put a stop to it. What we need is a new political language. We need a positive, unifying movement to restore a different approach to politics that includes grace and tolerance. The big enemy is dehumanizing your political opponents, which right now, unfortunately, is endemic in the United. This new tribe, this tribe of reason and humanity, which you don't need 51%, you just need 10%. If you get 10% in this tribe, we actually become the fulcrum in a polarized society that can help bring people together. And then you need an independent media arm that sends out the same messages, because I know around this room, you don't even know where to go for your news anymore, because you feel like the news is just getting polarized and skewed in a particular direction. You need an independent media organization and a capital structure that's analogous to the ones enjoyed by the major parties. If you do this, and you make the structural reforms to allow different points of view to genuinely compete and emerge, then we will have a chance.